All right, welcome back to another week of the Brazos Sports PrepsCast. It's week 10 of the Texas high school football season. I'm Alex Miller from the Eagle, joined by Abigail Ochoa, our trusty high school sports reporter. Abigail, it's Wednesday afternoon. It's cold. It's starting to feel like football weather. How are we doing
Yes,
today?
yes, it's a cold one. I love this weather. It pairs very well with football season, so I'm really excited. Also, we have some great games this week, so even better.
Yeah, we've honestly got the game of the week in the entire state between A&M and
Really, yeah,
Consolidated and Huntsville. And at the small school ranks, they're coming down the stretch, and we've got some district championships to be won.
yeah.
So we've got a lot to talk about today and break down and look ahead to. But first, let's look back at last week. As always, we always do that. Let's we're gonna hold off on discussing Rudder and their district opening loss.
Yeah.
Later in the program, we're gonna have Josh Criswell. He's the sports editor at the Huntsville Item. We're gonna break down last week's game between Rudder and Huntsville, and we're gonna look ahead to the Hornets taking on A&M Consolidated this Friday. But speaking of the Tigers, let's start with A&M Consolidated. Last
Yeah.
week, they opened district play with a 56-0 win over Lamar Consolidated. Honestly, it was an all-around strong effort for the Tigers. They had a balanced attack on offense with Sutton Lake and Keyshawn Thomas on the ground. Kyle Willis, he was efficient again throwing the ball. And Consol's defense, they were stout. That's the second straight game that they have held an opponent scoreless. That's 9 straight quarters without a
Yeah.
point. That's pretty big for Consol's defense. They made some big red zone stops at the end of each half, forced some key turnovers, had a fumble recovery for a touchdown at the end of the game. You know, this is a dangerous Tigers team, and we'll get into it here in a bit, but big one against Huntsville this week. You know, Abigail, the Tigers are on a roll, and here they come. This is kind of
Yeah.
the game of the season for them early on in the middle of the year.
Completely. And I think we all anticipated that they would, beat Lamar Consolidated. Just looking at the matchup beforehand, but they really showed out. I mean, you have two shutouts in the season. That's pretty scary for any team to be going up against that defense after last week's game. And then on the offensive side, you got a quarterback who's pretty smart and doesn't make a lot of mistakes when he is throwing. But then you also got a guy like Sutton Lake who can not only catch the ball but can run really well for them. Keyshawn Thomas, like you mentioned, also on the ground. So really scary team, when you're coming in to face them. Obviously, they're going to play Huntsville, who we saw how they could stop Rudder's offense a little bit, but I think, Consol really has a strong defense that they can lean behind, and also a really strong core offensively it'll make for a great matchup, and we'll talk about that later, obviously, with Josh, but it'll be a good one really early, too, in the season. I mean, come on.
Absolutely. Consol number 3, Huntsville number 10 in the 5A Division II rankings in the entire state. And Abigail, if I'm not mistaken, you got a story coming out later this week on Consol quarterback Kyle Willis.
Yeah, completely. It'll be on Friday's paper. I talked to Willis a little bit about kind of replacing Gage Paul and how that's been and how he was able to learn from him a little bit. Obviously, we've seen that he learned something, or that he's doing great so far this season. So he talks a little bit about what's working for them, the team chemistry, which we're really starting to see. I think they really have a good rhythm going. So, yeah, that'll be on Friday's paper.
Awesome. Well, keeping it rolling, Brian, they were in it in the first quarter. It was only 6-0 against Temple on the road, but unfortunately for the Vikings, the things fell apart pretty fast there in that second quarter. Temple had 4 touchdowns in just over 5 minutes before the half, and that was killer. Brian had a couple turnovers. Temple had some really good field position. I think all their drives started in plus territory. That's a tough loss for Brian. They went on the road and got beat pretty bad, but they're 2-1, and they've got a big home game against Belton. We'll get to that in a minute. But Abigail, What did you see from the Vikings last week? I know you weren't there, but what do
Yeah.
you make of their loss to Temple?
Yeah, we saw that they won against Target Heights, obviously, to start the season, which was a big win for them. Either way, we knew that they were coming on the road against Temple, which is always a tough team, in a tough district that they already have. They'll keep it going with the games in the next 2 weeks. Obviously, don't get any easier. But we've seen Brian. I guess what surprised me was maybe their defense. They were able to keep it close there in the first quarter, in the first half, but something I was obviously missing there on their defense. Last week we saw them they turned over the ball, they put pressure, they stopped a late they stopped a late touchdown pass, to the end zone. So, maybe an off week for them, but that was really kind of surprising to see that they weren't. Obviously, Temple's a great team, so. But yeah, I think their defense maybe fell a little short here.
And College Station Cougars, they played on Thursday last week, cruised to a 49-7 win over New Caney. Abigail, you were there. What did you see from the Cougars? And we won't really touch on them here in a bit because they're off this week before their big showdown against Lufkin. But Cougars kind of in a nice spot now after losing that district opener to Magnolia.
Yeah, pretty nice. I mean, they had 2 wins, against New Caney Porter, then New Caney on the road. What I really wanted to see from the Cougars this week was like an all-around effort from them. We saw their defense maybe win a game. Then we saw their offense kind of show out a little bit. But I kind of wanted to see it all come together, and it really did on Thursday, I think. The defense almost had a shutout. I mean, New Caney scored that touchdown in the last 45 seconds. And that just happens when you've been playing a football game for however many hours at that point. But their offense really came together. You had Huff, who was throwing pretty well. Then you had Marquise Collins and Roderick Brown, who we hadn't seen really too much of in their Porter win. They did get a touchdown, I believe, in that one, but we didn't see them really kind of come out as they had in the beginning. And they really showed out. Collins had 3 touchdowns last week. So I talked to Coach Huff a little bit about that after the game. He said that they had a hard time getting their running game going, but once they do get that run game going, it's hard to stop them as well. And then you got Huff, who has really good receivers. You got Houston Thomas and Dalton Carnes and, people like that. So we really saw an all-around effort from them. Defense still very aggressive and, has that fight in them. So that'll be really interesting. Obviously, they have a off week this week, and then they play Lufkin at home, which is going to be a big one for them to come back from. But I think this off week came at a really, really good time for them. I talked to Coach Huff a little bit. He said this is a time for them maybe to kind of get a little bit healthier, which is the first time we've kind of heard that maybe something, I don't know if an injury happened or whatever, but he said it was a good time for them to get healthier. And I think especially with a big opponent like Lufkin, who could kind of switch things up on you, later on down the line. I think it came at a really good time that they have a big win and then an off week for them.
For sure. And kind of as a side note, in that District 8 5A Division 1, kind of a outlying score last week, Magnolia West, they beat Caney Creek 97-0. Caney Creek was held to -10 yards of total offense. I'm not too sure what happened over there, but that's kind of crazy. That is a very lopsided score.
Yeah, totally. I thought I had to look at it twice when I saw it. 97-0. Wow. Yeah, Magnolia West, obviously we know they're going to be a tough contender for College Station down the line. I believe they end the regular season with them. But then, College Station after Lufkin, they have Cleveland and Caney Creek. So I think maybe depending on how Lufkin goes, they'll be able to kind of come back in those next 2 weeks before facing Magnolia West, which we know is probably going to be a really good matchup and really tough game to win for them.
For sure. Well, coming up next here on the Brazos Sports PrepsCast, we're joined by Josh Criswell, sports editor of the Huntsville Item, breaking down last week's game between Rudder and Huntsville and previewing Huntsville versus A&M Consolidated this Friday. All right, well, welcome back. We're joined now with Josh Criswell, the sports editor at the Huntsville Item. We're looking ahead to the biggest game of the week here in the Brazos Valley, biggest game of the state, honestly, maybe. It's A&M Consolidated. They're traveling to face the Huntsville Hornets. Josh, how are we doing today?
Doing fantastic. You just can't wait for Friday to finally get here, and hope when the weather cooperates with us, we might have some perfect football weather for maybe the best game in the state this season in Class 5A.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to the big game of the week, I want to look back last week because you came to Bryan College Station and covered Huntsville playing Rudder, and that was a big game to open district play. And Josh and Abigail, y'all were both there, and so I kind of real quick want to get y'all's takes on what you thought from that game. We knew that this was going to be a test for the Rudder offense against Huntsville's really strong defense, and the Hornets won that battle. The Rangers were pressured. They made critical turnovers early and got into a hole that was really hard to recover from. They rallied back, got within a score, but Huntsville put it away in the fourth quarter with those two scores. Abigail, I'll go to you first. What did this loss mean for Rudder? I mean, they started off with all the momentum. They've got playmakers, weren't able to get those plays, and started district play with kind of a sour taste in their mouth.
Yeah, we talked about it last week. This was going to be the toughest defense that they'd faced the entire season. We saw what their offense can do, but we hadn't seen what they could do with a tough defense, and it kind of gave them a little bit of a reality check, saying like, we're still in a tough district. We're not going to like run over anybody in this district. Really, it's going to be tough all the way through. We have guys who are, their records are 4-1 or better in this district. So we really saw that that Huntsville was able to really stop Rudder's offense, who had been pretty unstoppable the past few weeks. Lee had an interception early. He ran it back. They got the ball back, after throwing their own interception. Then they settled for a field goal on fourth, and I think it was 2 maybe or something like that. That's when I kind of thought, oh no, this is maybe not going to go the way that they want to. If they're settling for that, especially when they got guys like Izar or Lee. You got Willis, who could maybe run in there real quick. But that's when I thought things started to shift a little bit. You saw Huntsville, obviously their defense, one of the best, but really hurt the passing game when you stop Izar and that league connection. It's really hard to get anything going for Rudder on their offense. They don't really have a running back that can really do anything. We saw Huntsville obviously has Butcher McLean, who can do the running for them, and then AJ Wilson as well throwing. But I think it was definitely a reality check for Rudder, and I think it's going to have a lot to do with how they come back this week against Lake Creek.
Yeah, and Josh, on the flip side, big win for Huntsville out the gates. And, I mean, now they get another big test week 2 of district play. What did that win do for the Hornets starting district action last Friday?
I think it's really big for them because I think Brian Rudder is going to be one of the teams in the district that's probably going to be competing. I think you're going to have Huntsville and Consol in those top 2 spots. And then Rudder's going to be one of those teams that I think is going to be fighting for a third or potentially to mess things up, for those top 2 teams and sneak and get a 2 spot. So I think it was big for them just getting that win early. And I think it was big for Huntsville for one thing on each side of the ball. Big thing was the running game. You had Justin Butcher, who went off for 3 touchdowns in the first half. And then he goes down with a little bit of a leg injury. They turn the keys over to Jalen McLean, and he comes in and it doesn't skip a beat, finishes, I think, with 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that's coming off of a couple of games where the Huntsville offense really sputtered. So what I thought was interesting, too, was they came out of the gates. There was a lot of wind, so they kind of were forced to go power back style, and they just marched right down the field, got a score running the ball. So I think that's a big boost of confidence for an offense that was maybe lacking in that at some point, in the previous weeks. And then on the defensive side, Abigail mentioned the huge interception return by Keith Lee that happens, and you're thinking all of a sudden early in the game, Rudder has all the momentum, and if they go up and score here, they're going to take the lead.
Right.
And then just like we saw the week before, against CE King, they're down at the goal line and they're on the 7-yard line with 4 plays to win it. And Huntsville's defensive line just blows up the offensive line and makes a stop in the backfield for like 4 straight plays. So I think that's something that really showed, coming off of that, I think the goal line stand was a big statement for them. But I think there were several times where Rudder got into scoring position and then Huntsville's defensive line just absolutely took over the game, whether it was a sack, a tackle for loss. I mean, they had a kid come in, one of their starters was out. His first varsity start comes in. I think like the 4th play he was in, gets a strip sack that Huntsville recovers and just completely turns the momentum forever.
Yeah, well, now let's look ahead to the big game this week. It's at Bauer Stadium Friday night, the number 3 Tigers at the number 10 Hornets. 2 unbeaten teams going at it for the district lead early. This is the Harris Ratings game of the week in the state. So let's look at some keys to the game. Abigail, we'll go with you first. What is a key to a Consol win, and what would a win do for the Tigers?
Yeah, obviously, other than the district lead, of course, over Huntsville, but we've talked a little bit about it. Obviously, they had to replace some big hitters this season. We weren't sure how that was going to work for them. We know how Fedora is, so we're pretty confident in them coming back with something. But I think if they're able to get this big win at Huntsville, they're really going to prove like, hey, we can still do it even with all these people that we lost, and we're still in the top. But what they're going to need to do, obviously, is get past that Huntsville defense. Now, what I think is going to be different for them, obviously, than Rudder, is that they do have that run game. They do have something like and guys like that who can really take over. They're not only focusing Rudder, really, if you stop Izar, if you stop Lee from connecting, it's really hard to get anything going because their passing attack is so strong, and that's really what they rely on. Now, Consol, not so much. You do have Kyle Willis, who is able to make those throws, is able to make those big plays, but he doesn't necessarily always have to. He's also a little bit smarter than Izar in the fact that we saw Izar last week. He was pressured. He was running out of bounds and he threw it, and that was one of his first interceptions. Kyle Willis, he's a little bit smarter about like where he goes and stuff like that. But you do have the run game to really rely on. Obviously, we've seen Consol's defense and what they can do. So a little bit different than Rudder there, obviously. Consol does have that run game coming in. They do have a stronger defense. We've seen Rudder's defense kind of fall flat in a few games that we didn't expect them to, much less against, Huntsville. So I think that's kind of where they're going to shine a little bit and where it'll be different than when Rudder played Huntsville last week.
And Josh, what do you really think is the key to a Huntsville win, and what would a victory do for the Hornets?
Yeah, I think for the Hornets and for Consol in this fact, I think what a win does is a win sets you up where obviously both of them have a tough schedule ahead. We're very early in league play, but you're looking at if you go out and get a win this week, you have to figure you're going to be the favorite in every single regular season game you have for the rest of the year. And then all of a sudden, if you do that, you're talking about historic seasons and all-time great seasons in your program's history. So I think the thing that's really interesting about this game, especially because of how dominant both of them have been early, coming in undefeated, I think the winner of this game has a very realistic chance of going undefeated in the regular season. So I think that'd be a huge accomplishment for both of those programs. And obviously give them confidence moving into the playoffs. But a key for a Huntsville win, I'm going to go to the offensive side of the ball. I think Huntsville's defense, just like Consol's, is they're going to get theirs. They're going to make big plays and make big stops. I think the key for Huntsville is, can they get the big plays out of junior quarterback A.J. Wilson? He's a guy we've seen flashes of so far. He's electric with his legs, but he also has a tremendous arm. and he has a couple of really good playmakers on the outside. You know, they use Butcher on the outside as well as at running back. McLean they like to throw to out of the backfield, and then Jordan Woodbury is probably one of the most underrated receivers and returners in the district. So I think if A.J. Wilson is able to make big plays, maybe you see him make those X factor plays of 30 or more yards, you know, 4 or 5 times throughout the game. I think Huntsville's going to have a good chance to win because their kicker, Christian Avilar, you get him inside 45 yards and he's in his comfort range. So he can get points on the board if Huntsville's able to get a couple of those big chunk plays to get them in scoring position.
Well, I think it's no question that this is going to be a huge matchup this Friday. We've broken it down. We've discussed the key elements of the game. So I'm looking forward to Friday night in Huntsville. I think we're going to get a really good one there at Bauer Stadium. Well, Josh, before you go, can you let everybody know how they can find you on Twitter and how to follow your work online and get updates from the game on Friday?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, follow me on Twitter at item_Criswell, and then also go to itemonline.com/sports. We'll have live updates, highlights from the sideline, everything like that. And then also I'll be doing the sideline reporting on KSAM 101.7. So if you can pick us up over there by chance, you know, you can tune in and hear the call right there.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right, and up next, we're going to preview the biggest games of the week here in the Brazos Valley. All right, here we go. Final segment of the Brazos Sports PrepsCast. We're looking ahead to some of the other big area games this week, week 10 of the high school football season. If you're a small school, if you're a big school, not quite.
Yeah.
But speaking of big schools, let's go around the horn. We got a couple. Bryan ISD, we'll touch on them, their schools. So Rudder, they're going on the road this week. They're playing Montgomery Lake Creek. I think the biggest question to me is how will the Rangers respond? The Lions are 4-1, and they're coming off a convincing win over Fulshire last week. And, you know, I'm really curious how Rudder responds in this game, and this is not an easy matchup for them.
No, not at all. I mean, after coming off of Huntsville, obviously, we knew that was a game that was important to them because they lost last year at the end there. But this week doesn't get any better. But I think the difference between Rudder right now is that they do have the fight and they do have the guys to win. They do have the guys to later on in the district, you know, come in third or, you know, I think like Josh even mentioned, maybe even push somebody out a second. They do have the guys to do that. They didn't start off obviously well on the right foot, but they did get close to Huntsville. They got within, you know, it was 22-17 in the second half. So they just kind of need it all to click again. Obviously, I think, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to need to see somebody maybe come out in the run game, somebody come up strong for them. Because then if you got these defenses that are really going to stop your passing game, then what else can you do? But Montgomery Lake Creek is not going to be any easier. You got Dayton Sweeting and Ty Sexton. Sweeting is their guy. He runs for them. He's all over their stat sheet. He's usually the guy that is in the end zone, so they're going to need to watch out for him as well. And their defense does great too. They've held their last two teams, I believe, to one touchdown. So yeah, another hard test for Rudder. It's not going to get any easier, but I do think that if they're able to kind of settle in, calm down offensively, and kind of just put that game out of their mind from last week, they'll be able to at least put up a fight against Lake Creek.
Sure. Well, looking at Bryan now, they're home against Belton, who's already 2-0 in district play. You know, we've already kind of touched on it. This is kind of the middle of a tough 3-game stretch for the Vikings. They play Colleen Shoemaker next, who's also 2-0 in district play. You know, what are you seeing? What do you need to see from the Vikings this week, Abigail, coming off that tough loss to Temple?
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, I mentioned it earlier, their defense is good. I think we need to really see them step up again a little bit here. You know, offensively, I know they were pretty close throughout, but maybe seeing a little bit more firepower from them. We know they have the guys. We know they have good and people like that. So I think it's just really about, they'll be coming back home. Obviously, it's another tough team. They're not going to have a great road. They got Colleen Shoemaker, then they got who they got after that, Alex? They
after Colleen Shoemaker.
Yeah, they got a couple of big ones coming in, obviously. So it's going to be a tough road, but I think if they're able to get, a little bit, it'll be a tight game maybe. Whether it be with Belton or Shoemaker, if they're able to show a little bit of fight in either of those games, I think it'll give them some confidence, obviously coming off that Temple loss on the road. And they also, they have to remember that they did win against Parker Heights to start off the season after having 2 weeks off. So I think they just got to remember that. But yeah, who do they have after Shoemaker?
So I pulled up their schedule, Brian. They've got Belton, Colleen Shoemaker, and then they go home finale November 15th against Colleen, and then they finish the year at Coppers Cove and at Colleen Ellison. Those last 3 games, all 3 teams are 0-2 in district play starting out. So you got to think the Vikings are going to have a good shot in those games. It's just what happens these next 2 weeks. If they can split these next 2 weeks at the least, I mean, they're in great shape heading down the home stretch, putting themselves in playoff contention. Something that some people didn't expect from them this year.
Yeah, or even just put up a fight. Really, I would just love to see them be competitive in certain areas, and really, we don't want these. I'm sure they don't either. They don't want these next 2 games to be really blowouts or like. When you get to the fourth quarter, it's like, okay, let's hurry up. But because you do got that stretch at the end where they really could be, they could get those guys there at the end. But want to see something from them, obviously, in these next 2 weeks against Belton and then Shoemaker. Pretty tough teams.
For sure. Well, shifting gears here, we've got 3 district championships to be decided this week at the small school levels. And we've already discussed the big game in Walker County, but if you go up the road I-45 about 50 miles, you're going to find probably one of the biggest small school games of the week, Normandy, traveling to Centerville. These 2 Leon County rivals, they're squaring off for a bid at the district's top seed this Friday at Tiger Stadium. Normandy, they're unbeaten. They stayed undefeated last week, getting past winless Alto. I was kind of shocked at that one. They've only won by 2 scores. But with a win, the Panthers, they could secure their first district championship outright since 2015. Centerville, on the other hand, we were kind of questioning what was going to happen there for a second after they lost to Leon and then struggled against Alto. But Centerville's won 3 straight games since that loss to the Cougars. And now the Tigers are in position to win their 3rd straight district championship. And they'd be in the driver's seat in that district with a win over Normandy on Friday night. These are 2 teams we're familiar with. We know what Mason Hardy and Isaiah Jones bring to the table for Normandy. We know that Centerville, they've kind of had to change things up on offense. They lost Paxton Hancock, but, they've kind of had some guys emerge these last couple weeks, and they've really turned to Dylan Denman, which is a really smart move for the Tigers. He's such a threat at receiver, and you have Brent Roberts at quarterback. He can make those throws out there, make those passes where he can just go up and get them, or just throw a screen to him and let him have one-on-one with the defender on the outside. That works often too.
Yeah.
So huge game this Friday there in Centerville, Abigail.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. You're going to be out there. It should be a good one, Alex. We've talked about this before. Obviously, Centerville had a rough time. We didn't think that they would lose to Leon necessarily, or at least we thought it would be a little bit closer. But then they come back and they win 3 straight. They're still a strong team. It's not like it's going to be a blowout or anything this week by any means, I don't think. 2 great quarterbacks again. You got Roberts and Hardy. Now, last time we talked about this, the quarterback kind of duel. Hardy won, obviously, a couple weeks ago. But it should be a good one. I mean, Normandy last week, I was really surprised to see that score. I thought, if anything, also might get 1 score.
Sure.
They were going to get a little bit more. But I think that might have just been a little bit of a fluke on Normandy's defense. I still think that they're pretty strong. obviously, even if their defense isn't as strong, you've got those big guys on offense. You've got Hardy, you've got, like you said, Isaiah Jones to go at it. But defensive-wise, obviously last week they weren't able to really stop the rushing game, and that's really where also shined a little bit. And we saw it against Centerville game this week. Lavaldrick Phillips obviously is able to kind of come out for them and really do it. Had a pretty breakout game with for us.
Well, what I will do
So
it'll
be a pretty even matchup. Obviously, Norman G hasn't lost this season, so I'm sure Centerville is looking to knock them down a little bit on that front. But yeah, it's going to be for the district title, and should be a tough one.
For sure. Well, looking at some other ones here in District 12, 2A Division 1, Thorndale traveling to Hearn. Hearn's kind of flown under the radar this year, you know, and a win Friday would allow the Eagles to secure the district's top playoff seed. They're unbeaten this season. They're 6-0, 4-0 in district play. Remember, they had to cancel those 2 games early. We didn't get to see them play Franklin. Everybody was excited for that one. And now they've they've won their last 3 games by a margin of 122-7. Now, they haven't been playing that great of teams, but you're still winning games by a considerable margin. They held Rosebud Law and Thrall scoreless. And now comes the big test Friday. They're playing Thorndale. And this is the Bulldogs' regular season finale. So not only is the district championship on the line, but this is it for Thorndale before the playoffs. They've wrapped up a playoff spot already.
Yeah, totally. And man, imagine if they had played Franklin. I mean, what a matchup that would have been. But yeah, no, Hurden's been doing really well this season. Obviously undefeated. Their defense is very strong, and we've seen it just looking at the scores that they've won. Obviously, like you said, these teams aren't as tough that they've been playing. But Thorndale, they're 6-2 on the season. Every matchup that they've won this season has been pretty close. Whereas Hearn, we've seen them blow out, a few teams here and there. Obviously, you said, 122-7. I mean, wow. I think if Hearn's able to kind of come out pretty strong, maybe get a couple scores there early, I think it's going to be hard for Thorndale to catch up a little bit. I don't think it's going to be I don't think Hearn's going to blow them out of the water like they have been in the past few games. Obviously, this is probably their toughest opponent in the last few weeks. But they have the defense to go behind, and I think if they strike early, it's going to be hard to slow them down and slow that confidence down if Thorndale wants to have a chance there at the end.
For sure. And closing up our outlook on some of these other games in District 13, 2A, Division 2, Granger, they're traveling to Snook. And by my count, history would be made in Snook Friday night if the Blue Jays win, as they would claim their first district title in school history. You know, Snook started the month with that loss to Burton. They lost 36-0. We were kind of surprised by that. But Blue Jays, they've won back-to-back games over Somerville and Bartlett. And now they're in line to compete for the district title this week. A victory Friday would also give Snook the top seed in the playoffs. And since Snook beat Iola, I believe the Blue Jays will finish no worse than second in the district. Now, that's dependent on how Burton finishes. I had to go back and look. There's a lot of games to be played. That's one of the districts where they're trying to make up games. They're playing like every 5 days. They're actually playing 2 games tonight, a Wednesday. Burton, Milano, Iola, and Bartlett are all playing today. So, yeah, this is a big one out in Snook Friday night.
Yeah, they definitely have a chance to do a few things here, like you said. Get the top seed of the playoffs, obviously, depending on how these other games go, but also get that district title. I mean, this is the first year that they've had the stadium with them, first time they've ever had a homecoming game, true homecoming game. So this really could be a very historic, it's already historic for Snook in different ways, but this could add to the roster there a little bit. It'll be a tough one, though. I mean, you don't have an easy one in Granger. Granger, I believe that they haven't lost this season. They got a strong quarterback in Thomas Rhodes. They're pretty consistent. I believe last week they, scored 4 straight touchdowns. So they're pretty consistent in kind of in their passing game and things like that. Snook, I think it's going to be important for them. Obviously, they had a lot riding in that first that home opener in their new stadium, and they ended up losing that one barely, but they ended up losing that one. So I think it's going to be important for them to just kind of maybe wipe all of that history making out of their heads. It's just another game. It's just another week for them. I think that's going to be really important for them to just kind of calm down, do what they need to do. We've seen what they can do. They have that little bit of confidence coming off those 2 straight wins after losing to Burton, which, like you said, we were pretty surprised about that. We thought that would be a little bit tougher of a fight from both, but I think it's going to be really important for them to just kind of focus on this game alone, not really try to do too much, just do what they can and do what they're good at.
Sure, and we've got a lot of other small school action in the Brazos Valley this week. You can check theeagle.com for a breakdown of where each area's school stands in the playoff race as the regular season winds down. And I went and caught some Monday Night Football action this week.
Yeah.
Bremond, and so you can go read my in-depth look on how Bremond's bounced back with the 2 wins in their altered football season. We didn't even get to talk about Bremond. They're playing Mart on Saturday. That's a huge game. So Bremond taking on number 1 Mart this Saturday, 6 p.m., I believe, is kickoff for that. So, and we've got reporters all over the Brazos Valley this Friday. Abigail is going to be out in Huntsville covering A&M Consolidated-Huntsville. Yeah. I will be in Centerville covering Norman G. Centerville. Our Travis L. Brown, he's going to be at Thorndale and Hearn. And we've got our stringer, Leah Musgrave. She's going to be in Snook covering Granger and Snook. So follow all of them on social media. Follow at Brazos Sports. Please tweet us your score updates so we can keep track of what's going on. And, yeah, it's a big Friday night here in the Brazos Valley.
It's a big one. I feel like we say that every week. But this one really –
This one really is, actually.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all we've got for today. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Brazos Sports PrepsCast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Tune in each week for the latest in Brazos Valley high school football. So for Abigail Ochoa, I'm Alex Miller. Thanks again. We'll see you next week, everyone.
Bye.